Welcome back to the deep dive. Today is going to be one of those sessions where you might want to sit down, maybe grab a notebook, or frankly, a stiff drink.
Yeah, perhaps both would be appropriate given the absolute sheer amount of ground we are covering today.
Definitely both, because if you could see inside my head right now, it looks like a conspiracy board. You know the type red string everywhere, thumbtacks connecting things that really just shouldn't be connected at all. We have financial plumbing, secret emails, prison policies, and somehow two-faced.
It does sound like a completely chaotic mix when you list them out like that.
Mhm.
Sounds like we've just thrown a bunch of random clippings into a blender.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at the source material we have today, which comes from a very dense, very intense broadcast of the Dutch program Black Box, Tay, there's a genuine method to the madness.
Right. We are peeling back the layers of, official narratives across four distinct pillars of society. We're looking at finance, global power structures, social justice, and personal health. I mean, it's a lot to take in for one sitting.
It is a massive undertaking. But the common thread here, the thing that ties all of this together, is systems. Whether it's the EU financial system, the prison system, or the medical system, the sources we are analyzing today argue that the official story, basically the press release version of reality, often masks a deeper and frankly much more problematic reality underneath.
We've got quite the lineup of perspectives to unpack today, too. We're not just hearing from random pundits. We are analyzing the specific perspectives of financial journalist Arno Wellens, Member of Parliament Gideon Van Meyeren, women's rights campaigner Caroline Franson, and holistic dental hygienist Corinne Maria Kaiser.
Exactly. And our mission today is to really understand the counter-narratives they are presenting. They're out there asking the uncomfortable questions. Like, who actually controls our money? Who controls our safety? And who controls our bodies?
It feels a bit like we're entering the Matrix here. So let's start with the money, because honestly, this first part completely blew my mind. We start with something that sounds incredibly boring, tax regulation, and we end up with a chef making fish soup out of bad debt.
It is quite a journey. But you really have to start with the boring stuff to understand how the trap is set.
Fair enough. So it starts with this thing called Box 3 taxation in the Netherlands. Now, for our listeners who aren't Dutch tax experts, which I'm going to safely assume is most of you tuning in, can you explain why Arno Wellens, the financial journalist, was calling this absolute insanity?
Right. So the core of this controversy centers on a proposal to tax what they call unrealized gains.
Unrealized gains. That sounds like typical financial jargon. Let's unpack that thoroughly. That basically means money you haven't actually made yet, right?
Exactly. Let's break it down with a very concrete example. Let's say you buy some stocks, or maybe you have a second home as an investment, or even just a standard savings account that is tied to investments. The value of that asset goes up on paper over time.
Okay, so say I bought a house for $200,000. The market goes crazy, and now the real estate websites say it's worth $250,000.
Correct. But you haven't sold it. You do not have that extra $50,000 sitting in your checking account or your pocket. It's literally just numbers on a screen. But under this Box 3 proposal, the government looks at that paper growth, that $50,000, and says, you owe us tax on that profit right now.
Wait, but I don't have the money. The money is trapped inside the physical house. I can't just break off a piece of the chimney and mail it to the tax authority.
And that is precisely the problem Wellens is highlighting. He points out that if you have a second home or stocks that go up in value, you owe tax on that paper profit immediately.
But what if the market crashes next week? What if my $250,000 house drops to $150,000?
That's the insanity he refers to. If the market crashes later, you've already paid tax on money you never actually had. And good luck trying to get a refund from the tax man for a loss that happened after you already paid your bill. Wellens points out that this creates a massive liquidity problem for regular people. You might literally be forced to sell the asset just to pay the tax on the growth of the asset.
That defeats the entire purpose of saving or investing in the first place. It's like eating your own tail to survive. I mean, Wellens was pretty colorful with his comparisons here. He mentioned that international observers are looking at the Netherlands like they've completely lost their minds.
Yes, he specifically cited GSOD on Twitter, noting that international voices find this completely baffling. It's distinctively weird policy. But the comparison that really stuck out, and this really shows you the level of anger and frustration here, was when Wellens compared this aggressive taxation to North Korea-style total seizure.
Whoa. North Korea. That is definitely not a comparison you want to hear when discussing your personal savings account. Usually you compare taxes to, I don't know, Sweden or Belgium. But North Korea, that seems like hyperbole, doesn't it?
Well, it is hyperbolic, of course, to make a point about the state's reach. His broader point is about the fundamental attack on property rights. In North Korea, the state owns absolutely everything. Willens is arguing that if the state can tax money you haven't even earned yet, they are effectively claiming ownership of your potential wealth. They are seizing the future value of your private property.
He also contrasts it with nearby countries to show how extreme it is, right? Because normally we think of the Netherlands as a very reasonable, business-friendly place.
Right, he compares it to France. Now, France is historically known for having high taxes. But even in France, the wealth tax starts at the higher millions. You have to be properly massively rich. In the Netherlands, this Box 3 issue starts affecting people with around 60,000 euros in savings.
Wow. So we aren't talking about billionaires on super yachts here. We aren't talking about the monopoly guys with monocles.
Not at all. Wellens specifically brings up the example of a self-employed ICU nurse to illustrate this.
An ICU nurse, I mean, that's about as essential as a worker gets in our society.
Exactly. Someone who works freelance, maybe? So they don't have a massive corporate pension plan to fall back on. They save money in a modest investment account just to survive when they are old. They have worked hard, saved specifically for their own pension over decades. Suddenly, because they have saved maybe 100 or 200,000 over a lifetime of grueling work, they are being treated as ultra-rich and taxed on paper profits they desperately need for retirement.
That is incredibly rough. It really feels like punishing responsibility.
It does. But here is where it gets really interesting, and this is the deep dive part of his analysis. Wellen says this isn't just a quirky, stupid Dutch tax law. He claims this is actually the first step or a symptom of a much, much larger European plan.
Okay, wait. So the Dutch tax office isn't just being greedy in a vacuum. They are following some kind of overarching orders.
In a way, yes. This is where we have to zoom out. The Box 3 tax is just the trigger mechanism. The real story, according to Wellens, is the massive push for a savings and investment union and a capital markets union within the broader EU.
Those sound like very boring, bureaucratic names, the exact kind of things you just scroll past in the newspaper to get to the sports section.
Which is usually exactly how major structural changes are branded. If you called it Operation Seize Your Savings, people would obviously panic.
Fair point. So what is the official pitch then? How do they sell the idea of a savings and investment union to the public?
It's primarily marketed as helping startups. The pitch is essentially, Europe needs to be competitive on the global stage. The idea is that a Greek billionaire should be able to easily invest in a Dutch startup, or a Dutch pension fund should be able to easily invest in a Spanish tech company. They want to create a single, deep financial market to compete with Silicon Valley.
Which sounds great on the surface. I mean, who doesn't want more innovation and easier investment? If I'm a Dutch startup founder, I want access to that Greek money.
That is the Trojan horse argument Willens makes. He says that marketing is a complete lie. He argues that the real goal isn't about funding startups at all. It's about consolidating European state debt.
Okay, we need to unpack that. How do we get from helping cool new startups to consolidating national debt? This feels like a massive leap.
You have to look at the macro state of Europe to understand it.
Yeah.
You have countries like the Netherlands that are financially relatively solid. They have strict budgets. They save money over the years. Then you have countries, Wellen specifically points to France here, that have unmanageable spiraling debts. He mentions France running a 6% deficit.
And the whole pension age thing comes into play here too, right? Because that's always a huge point of contention.
It's a huge factor. In the Netherlands, people work until they are, 67? In France, there are literal riots in the streets if you try to raise the pension age above 62 or 64. So you have a very tense situation where the Dutch are working longer, theoretically, to pay for the French to retire earlier. That is the underlying political tension.
So the Dutch have money, the French have debt, and the EU wants to what, just mix them together?
Exactly. The mechanism is what really matters here. This is the technical heart of the hidden mechanic Wellens is describing. It's called securitization. And this brings us to the famous fish soup analogy.
The fish soup. I love this analogy so much. Please explain how the massive European economy is like a bowl of day-old fish.
Wellens credits this analogy to the late, great chef Anthony Bourdain. The idea is wonderfully simple. Imagine you are a chef. It's Monday morning. You have fish left over from Friday that you couldn't sell over the weekend.
Right. And it's getting a bit funky.
It's old. It smells a bit off. You can't just serve it as a fresh fillet to a customer because they will take one bite and send it back. So what do? Do you throw it away and take a huge financial loss?
Not if I'm running a restaurant on razor-thin margins.
Exactly. You chop it up into tiny, unrecognizable pieces. You boil it with strong spices, tons of garlic, tomatoes, maybe some strong wine, and you put it on the menu as bouillabaisse, fish soup.
And it tastes delicious. The garlic totally covers the smell of the rotting fish.
Right. The consumer buys the soup, it tastes okay to them, and they have absolutely no idea it's made of old, risky fish that should have been thrown out.
And applying this metaphor to global finance, the old fish is debt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wellens explains that pre-2008, banks did this exact thing with bad mortgages. That was the core of the Lehman Brothers crash. They took toxic mortgages from people who simply couldn't pay, packaged them together in a complex financial box, and sold the whole box to investors as a high-quality, safe bond.
And when the housing market turned, the soup went bad.
And the whole world got severe financial food poisoning. Now, Wellens argues the EU wants to do this exact same thing, but with state bonds,
So they take the solid debt from a financially stable country like the Netherlands,
which represents the fresh fish in this scenario,
and they mix it with the highly risky debt from Southern Europe.
the old smelly fish.
They package it all together into a shoebox, that's the securitization part, and they sell the whole package to investors as a European safe asset.
Yes, safe asset. It sounds so reassuring, doesn't it? Like a warm financial blanket.
That is just devious, but surely this is just a necessary reaction to recent crises, like COVID. Everyone was panicking during COVID. Maybe they just threw the system together in an emergency to save the economy.
Wellens says absolutely not. He is very, very specific about the timeline to disprove the whole emergency theory. He cites a highly specific document, press release 5005 from the year 2017.
2017, that's years before anyone had ever heard of COVID.
Exactly. He argues this elaborate plan for a European safe asset was hatched long, long before the pandemic. He says the plan was already sitting in a drawer in Brussels, just waiting for a reason to be implemented.
So when the pandemic hit,
It was a perfect opportunity. Remember, the Dutch Prime Minister at the time, Mark Rutte, had promised his voters no Eurobonds, absolutely no shared European debt. It was a hard, non-negotiable line for his party.
I do remember that. It was a huge political talking point. The sentiment was very much, we will not pay for Italy's debt.
But when the pandemic hit, the Corona Recovery Fund became the Trojan vehicle. Wellens argues the underlying plan for a debt union existed in 2017. The effect of the actual implementation came with COVID. The crisis was simply the excuse they needed to bypass the fierce political opposition.
So the source is arguing they used the virus as a cover to implement a massive banking policy they already wanted anyway.
That is the core allegation, yes. And now, as we look forward, the Next Generation EU Fund, which was that huge pool of COVID money, ends in 2027. The emergency is over. So the push is on right now to renew this debt cycle permanently. They just need a new reason.
And what's the new reason going to be?
Wellens suggests they will use defense or climate funding as the new justification. He mentions that Mario Draghi has a comprehensive plan for this. They will stand up and say, we need a defense union because of the war, or we need a massive climate union because of global warming. But the underlying financial mechanism, the fish soup, remains exactly the same.
He used another metaphor that really stuck with me, feeding the bear.
Yes. This is a very chilling image when you think about it. Imagine we are camping in the woods. There is a massive angry bear at the door of our cabin. The bear represents an impending economic crisis, a massive market crash, a severe correction where financial reality finally catches up with us.
And nobody wants to wrestle the bear?
Obviously not. To keep the bear away, to keep it from breaking the door down, we keep throwing it little bits of food. We throw it artificially low interest rates. We throw it trillions in printed money. We throw it shared European debt.
We're just buying time. Here, eat the stimulus check. Just please don't eat me.
We are feeding the bear. But the terrifying part is we are running out of food. We're completely running out of financial instruments. We've already done the 0% interest thing. We've already printed trillions upon trillions. Wellens says the Savings and Investment Union grabbing that huge untapped pool of private savings from regular European citizens and putting it into the securitized system is the last bit of food we have left.
He called it the last bit of Bobby Pingang.
Right. And when that's gone, when the citizens' savings are absorbed,
The bear comes in.
the crisis hits, and there's nothing left to throw at it.
So what does he actually suggest we do? Is there a way out, or are we just sitting here waiting to be eaten?
His solution is radical, painful austerity. He's talking about cutting 1/3 of total government spending.
1/3. That's massive. That's not just trimming the fat. That's closing schools, stopping road work, halting major programs.
It's incredibly drastic. He suggests stopping expensive climate and nitrogen policies that cost billions. And he says we have to face the demographic decline honestly, meaning we can't afford the pension promises we've made. It's a harsh, bitter prescription, essentially saying we need to stop living on credit and face the brutal reality of our finances before the bear breaks the door down.
Wow. That's a really heavy way to start. We've got a rigged tax system, a fish soup economy, and a hungry bear waiting outside. It really seems like the financial system is built entirely on extend and pretend. But sadly, we aren't done with the shadowy stuff yet. We are moving from the money to the power.
We are just getting started on the hidden mechanics.
Let's pivot to section 2 of our deep dive. We are moving from the financial plumbing to the actual people who might be turning the valves. We're talking about the World Economic Forum, the WEF, and Jeffrey Epstein.
This is where the source material takes a very sharp turn into what Member of Parliament Gideon van Meijeren calls the shadow power.
Okay, I have to pause you here. Because usually when you hear WEF and Epstein in the same sentence, most people immediately roll their eyes and say, okay, here comes the crazy internet conspiracy theory. Does Gideon van Meijeren actually have anything tangible to back this up? Or is he just connecting dots with red string on a corkboard?
That's a very fair skepticism to have, but Gideon claims there is actual documentary proof. He brings up the Epstein files. These are the actual documents and flight logs that have been revealed through various court cases showing specific documented contact between Bers Brende, who is the CEO of the WEF, and Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay, so they knew each other. But just knowing Jeffrey Epstein isn't necessarily a crime in itself. A lot of very famous, powerful people knew him before the whole scandal broke wide open. What were they actually talking about? Was it just, hey, let's have lunch?
It was much more substantive than that, according to the source. Gideon says the emails discuss building a new global architecture. There is explicit discussion in these documents about potentially replacing the United Nations, or at least the core functions of the UN, with the World Economic Forum.
Replacing the UN with a private club, that is massive. I mean, the UN is heavily flawed, sure, but it's composed of sovereign nations. The WEF is basically just a coalition of massive global corporations.
That is the absolute core of Gideon's argument here. He says this documentary evidence validates years of warnings that people dismissed. Politicians like Mark Rutte have often dismissed the WEF as just a harmless chat club, a benign place where world leaders go to drink expensive coffee and network in Davos.
Right. The official line is always, it's just a conference, don't worry about it. It's like TED Talks, but for billionaires.
Exactly. But Gideon argues these emails prove it is a literal policy-making entity. It's an entity actively seeking to override democratic national institutions. If they are behind closed doors discussing global architecture and functionally replacing the UN, that is not just a chat over coffee. That is serious strategic planning.
He uses the term deep state. Now, that is a highly loaded term. It gets thrown around a lot, especially in American politics, to mean a million different things.
Sure.
How does he define it in this specific context?
He describes it more as a structural critique. It's not necessarily a smoke-filled room of 5 guys laughing evilly while stroking a white cat. It's about the dynamic of visible versus invisible power.
Okay, so visible power is what we see on TV every day, parliament sessions, public debates, politicians voting.
Exactly. That's the theater of it. But Gideon argues that by the time a major decision actually reaches the floor of Parliament, it has already been completely pre-cooked by the invisible power. This invisible tier includes big tech, big finance, royalty, and heavily connected figures like Epstein.
And the fundamental problem is the total lack of accountability.
Precisely. There are no public minutes for these meetings. There is no transparency for the voters. Yet these private meetings heavily influence massive global agendas, things like rolling out digital IDs, setting binding climate goals, determining pandemic responses. You can't vote these people out of power because you never voted them into power in the first place.
Let's talk more about Epstein, because Gideon goes pretty deep into his background here. He asks a question that I think a lot of regular people have asked over the years. How does a random high school math teacher become an international power broker?
It is the great glaring anomaly of the entire Epstein story. He was just a high school math teacher. He had absolutely no formal financial training. He wasn't some known Wall Street prodigy with a track record.
Yeah.
Yet suddenly, out of nowhere, he He gets total power of attorney over the vast wealth of Leslie Wexner, a retail billionaire.
And not just, hey, manage my stock portfolio. It was total legal control.
Yes, he could hire, fire, buy properties, sell assets, take out massive loans in Wexner's name.
Uh-huh.
It was full, unmitigated power and authority over a billion-dollar empire.
It just doesn't make any sense on a basic resume level. Why would a ruthless billionaire give a completely unqualified math teacher the literal keys to the kingdom?
Gideon suggests the intelligence asset theory to explain this. He points to the very real links with Robert Maxwell and his daughter Ghislaine Maxwell. Robert Maxwell had extremely well-documented links to the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency.
So the theory presented by the source is that Epstein wasn't just a wealthy creep. He was an active intelligence operative.
That is the argument. Gideon suggests the whole sprawling operation, the bizarre baby factory plans out in New Mexico, the private island, the constant massages, it was all a massive, sophisticated honey trap operation.
A honey trap. That's classic spycraft 101.
You get powerful people, princes, politicians, influential CEOs into highly compromising, illegal situations with minors. You tape the entire thing. It's known that Epstein's houses were wired with hidden cameras absolutely everywhere.
And once you have the tape on someone,
You completely own them. You control their future decision-making. Gideon argues this wasn't just about pure perversion. It was fundamentally about political control. It was an industrial-scale blackmail operation. If you have the leader of a country or the head of a major global bank on tape doing something horrific, you can dictate their policy decisions without ever having to run a political campaign.
that is terrifying because it perfectly explains why so many high-profile people were protected by the justice system for so long. And Gideon expresses immense frustration in the source material that the Dutch parliament flat out refuses to debate these revelations.
He says they just shrug their shoulders. They dismiss it as fringe internet theory, even when the actual court documentation and flight logs are coming out in the open. He feels that the political class is either actively complicit or willfully blind to the very real possibility that key decision makers might be compromised by blackmail.
And how does this connect back to us, the regular people listening to this? Arno Wellens actually jumped back in here with a connection to digital IDs. Because if you have a shadow power structure, what is the one thing they want more than anything else? Absolute control.
This is the critical connective tissue between the money we discussed in Part 1 and the power we are discussing now.
Mhm.
Wellens links the WEF agenda directly to the global push for a digital ID.
Is this just a digital version of my driver's license on my smartphone? Because that just sounds convenient.
They want it to be much, much more than that. The mechanism they are pushing is a comprehensive digital wallet that combines your private medical data, your financial data specifically tying into a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, and your personal ID, all in one centralized hub.
That sounds like one app to rule them all. Convenient, maybe, but also deeply terrifying from a privacy standpoint.
Wellens points out the massive commercial motive behind this. He mentions a very specific detail, that MasterCard actually wrote the text for the WES digital ID proposal.
MasterCard, the credit card company. Why are they writing global ID policy?
Yes. And their ultimate goal, according to the source, is total data commodification. They want to be able to seamlessly trade and analyze your medical data, potentially against the user's will or without explicit consent.
Why would MasterCard care about my medical data?
Impulse purchases and credit risk assessment. If their algorithms know you are currently depressed based on your medical data or therapy visits, maybe they push targeted ads for junk comfort food or expensive retail therapy. If they know you just got diagnosed with a chronic illness, maybe they preemptively lower your credit limit because you're suddenly a higher financial risk.
It turns the everyday citizen into a completely transparent data point to be squeezed for profit.
And control. If your money is fully digital and programmable through a CBDC, and it's intrinsically tied to your ID and your real-time health status, the potential for top-down control is absolute.
Man, so we have a rigged fish soup economy, a shadow government using underage blackmail to control leaders, and a corporate plan to track everything we do, buy, and feel digitally. I really need a break, but we aren't taking one. We have to keep moving to the third pillar, the social battleground.
Yes, we are moving from the highly abstract systems of global finance and shadow power to the very concrete, very physical, and sometimes violent reality of prisons and public spaces.
This segment featured Caroline Franson from the Foundation Vorzy, and this was very tough to listen to. The core issue she is discussing is biological males who identify as women being housed in women's prisons.
It's a profound clash between modern ideology and physical biological reality. Franson argues that self-ID laws, which are laws that allow you to change your legal gender just by stating it without medical transition, have created a massively dangerous loophole. If a violent male criminal simply says, "I am a woman," the system now defaults to believing them and accommodating them.
She gave a specific example that was just horrifying, a prisoner in the Turpeel prison.
Yes, this is a crucial, specific case for her argument. She mentions a biological male who was convicted of brutally killing another man. And the nature of the crime was incredibly violent. We're talking about 200 stab wounds and actually gouging out the victim's eyes.
That is literal nightmare fuel, and this specific individual is now where?
In a women's prison, identifying as a woman, living day-to-day among female inmates.
And apparently this inmate isn't just sitting quietly in a cell serving time either.
No. Franson reports that this specific inmate has somehow become the chairwoman of the prisoner committee.
That is absurd. The incredibly violent Fox is literally in charge of the henhouse.
She also mentioned an incident of a female prison guard having her teeth violently knocked out by a trans-identified inmate. Her overarching argument here is that female inmates are an extremely vulnerable population to begin with. Many of them have been severe victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse by men prior to being incarcerated. Being locked up in tight quarters with biological males, especially violent ones, is deeply re-traumatizing. They are absolutely terrified and they have nowhere to go.
She says this situation actually violates the Geneva Convention.
Yes, specifically regarding the separate housing of prisoners. She argues that even in the brutal context of war, prisoners of war are strictly separated by sex for their own basic safety. But she says the very definition of the word woman has been legally changed to just mean human in these new policies, effectively erasing the biological reality that prisons were originally designed to separate.
This specific prison issue spills over into the broader ideological conflicts she discussed. She talked about the medicalization of minors. This is obviously another massive hot-button issue globally.
This is where the highly controversial term chemical castration came up in the source. Franson is very critical of the use of puberty blockers on children. She argues that what is called gender-affirming care for minors effectively and permanently halts natural development.
What are the specific side effects she mentioned to back up that claim?
She claims it severely blocks cognitive development. She actually mentioned studies showing a potential 10 IQ point drop, as well as halting normal sexual development. She forcefully calls it the mismaking of otherwise totally healthy bodies.
That is a very strong, uncompromising stance, and she says the political landscape in the Netherlands is heavily skewed on this issue.
She points out that almost all the major mainstream Dutch parties, the VVD, CDA, D66, Green Left, openly support these self-ID laws. She says only the right-wing or populist parties like PVV, FVD, and BBB are actively opposing it. She feels that the traditional left has completely abandoned women's safety on this issue in favor of pushing gender ideology.
And it seems like just speaking out publicly against this ideology is becoming physically dangerous.
This perfectly brings us to the cancel culture part of the segment.
Right. We heard about the case of Roger Kalman. He's a comedian, not a right-wing politician, not a pundit, just a guy trying to tell jokes on stage. His upcoming shows in the city of Breda were abruptly canceled.
Why? Did he say something completely terrible or illegal?
He was aggressively accused of being a fascist, an extremist, and a woman hater by anonymous online activists. The venue owners hosting his comedy shows started receiving highly threatening emails.
Threatening how, exactly? Like, we won't buy tickets to your club anymore, or we will write a bad Yelp review.
No, much more severe. Threatening actual physical violence and property damage. Things like, we will throw stones through your windows, we will cause trouble at your venue.
Wow. So the venues are canceling his comedy show, not necessarily because they agree with the protesters' politics, but simply because they are scared for their glass windows and their physical safety. Exactly. It's total capitulation out of raw fear. And Gideon Van Meiren pointed out the profound irony here. These activist groups often call themselves anti-fascist or Antifa.
Right, anti-fascist action.
Yet Gideon argues that using the threat of physical violence and severe intimidation to silence speech, you simply disagree with. That is the very textbook definition of historical fascism. He says their actual real-world tactics are fascist, even if their chosen name is anti-fascist.
Carolyn shared her own harrowing personal experience with this exact kind of intimidation, too.
She did. She spoke about trying to organize Let Women Speak events. These are basically just public squares where women gather to talk openly about their rights and their concerns. She said they required massive police protection. We're talking cops on horses, police dogs, just to hold a peaceful meeting because of the aggressive, screaming mobs of activists trying to shut them down.
It paints a very bleak picture of a society where the official narrative, which is always that we are highly inclusive, tolerant, and progressive, completely masks a dark reality of physical intimidation and forced silence.
It connects right back to that overarching theme of hidden systems. The legal system allows self-ID. The social system rigidly enforces it through cancellation and violent intimidation. And the individual, whether it's the terrified female inmate locked in a cell or the comedian trying to do a gig, is left totally caught and crushed in the middle.
Speaking of the individual, let's get personal. Very, very personal. Let's look inside our own mouths.
Section 4, the personal ecosystem.
We had Corinne Maria Kaiser, a holistic dental hygienist. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw biodentistry on the source list for today, I thought, okay, here we go, the big toothpaste conspiracy. Sounds a little woo-woo to me. But she actually made some points that connect really well with the other heavy systemic topics we've covered.
She starts her argument with a really great visual analogy, the horse in the mouth.
Which is what exactly?
The idea is that historically, we look at a horse's teeth to judge its overall systemic health. If the horse's teeth are rotting or bad, we instantly know the whole horse is sick. We implicitly understand the bodily connection. But for human beings, modern medicine treats the mouth like it's a separate garage completely detached from the main house.
We treat it like it's just not part of the biological body. Like, I'll just fix this local part here, drill this hole, and it surely won't affect my heart or my brain.
Exactly. We fill the mouth with harsh chemicals, heavy metals, and toxins, and we just boldly assume it won't affect the rest of the biological system. She calls conventional dentistry mere symptom management, whereas she defines holistic dentistry as looking at systemic root cause health.
So instead of just drilling the hole and filling it, ask why the hole is there in the first place.
Right. Look at the diet, the stress, the whole system. And she went straight for the actual materials dentists use every day. First up, amalgam fillings.
The silver ones. I actually have 2 of those from when I was a kid. My parents have a mouth completely full of them.
Well, she explicitly calls them the asbestos of dentistry.
Oof. That is definitely not a comforting brand name to have sitting in my molars.
They contain mercury. Everyone knows mercury is highly toxic to the human nervous system. It's technically illegal to use them now in many progressive places, but she points out the real acute danger comes when a dentist is drilling them out to replace them. If you just drill aggressively into an old amalgam filling, invisible mercury vapors are violently released into the air.
And where exactly do those toxic vapors go?
Straight into the patient's brain and internal organs, and into the dentist breathing the same air. She warns that without very strict, specialized holistic protocols, you are literally poisoning yourself by trying to fix an old tooth.
Great. I'll try to just hold my breath for 45 minutes next time I'm at the dentist. But she also went after something I use literally every single morning. Mouthwash.
Yes, specifically mouthwashes containing chlorhexidine. She doesn't hold back. She calls it a chemical bomb in your mouth.
A chemical bomb. It's supposed to make my brow minty fresh for meetings. It says right on the plastic bottle, kills 99.9% of germs.
And that, she argues, is the exact problem. It indiscriminately kills all the bacteria, the good, the bad, and the essential. Your mouth is a highly complex ecosystem, a microbiome. And here is the specific systemic health link she cited that absolutely blew me away when I read it. She cites a cardiologist's claim that killing your natural mouth bacteria with heavy daily mouthwash can actively raise your blood pressure.
Wait, what? How on earth does rinsing with minty mouthwash raise your cardiovascular blood pressure? That sounds like a massive stretch of logic.
It turns out certain specific types of good bacteria living on your tongue and in your mouth are directly responsible for producing a chemical called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide enters your bloodstream and helps dilate your blood vessels. It naturally relaxes them and keeps them wide open.
Okay, I'm following the biology.
If you drop a chemical bomb and kill all those specific bugs twice a day, you completely stop the natural production of nitric oxide. Your blood vessels constrict because they lack that chemical signal. When vessels constrict, your overall blood pressure goes up.
So by trying to just have fresh breath for my coworkers, I might literally be giving myself a heart attack over the long term.
It's a stark, terrifying example of how blindly intervening in a highly complex system like the human body, without understanding all the subtle connections, can have disastrous unintended consequences. And if you think about it, it's the exact same logic as the macroeconomy we talked about. Intervening with fish soup to fix a short-term problem creates a much bigger, fatal crisis later on.
She also heavily touched on the business model of the dental industry itself.
It's all about profit over health. She claims that basic materials cost 5 times more simply because they have the magic label dental stamped on them.
Ah, so it's like the wedding tax, but for teeth. You say wedding, the cake is triple the price. You say dental, the resin is 5 times the price.
Exactly the same concept. And she points out a massive conflict of interest. Major dental congresses and scientific summits are heavily sponsored by the big commercial brands, companies like Colgate. So the objective science being presented to your local dentist often miraculously ends with the conclusion that supports buying a specific corporate product.
That perfectly echoes what we heard about the financial system and the political system. Just follow the money.
She also issued a very modern warning about radiation. We are, in her words, walking antennas. We routinely put metal retainers, titanium implants, and metal screws directly into our heads. And we now live in a modern world saturated with Wi-Fi signals and 5G radiation. She heavily questions the long-term biological interaction between having a mouthful of conductive metal and living in a high radiation environment.
It's a holistic view that basically says you absolutely cannot poison or alter one tiny part of an interconnected system and expect the whole system to remain completely healthy.
Precisely. The system always balances the ledger eventually.
Okay, let's take a breath here. We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. We started deep in the weeds with the Dutch tax office, went to the massive EU bond market, visited Jeffrey Epstein's private inbox, looked inside a high-security women's prison, and ended up analyzing the hidden dangers of morning mouthwash.
It is a lot to process. But if we try to step back and synthesize all of this, what is the overarching picture the source material paints?
It really feels like a picture of fake realities.
That's a very good way to put it.
I mean, Arno Wellens tells us the financial stability of the entire EU is a total facade, a toxic fish soup of hidden rotting debt wrapped up in a pretty safe asset bow.
Gideon Van Meijeren tells us that democratic national governance is a facade. The real binding decisions are made years in advance by a shadow network involving unelected people like Epstein and the WEF.
Caroline Franson tells us that safety and compassion in the prison system is a facade. Physical, biological reality is being completely ignored for modern ideological goals, masking the very real danger to vulnerable women.
And Corinne Ria Kaiser tells us that modern dental health is a facade. We are using highly toxic materials and calling it health care, blindly treating local symptoms while completely ignoring the systemic fallout.
The common denominator across all four pillars is the massive disconnection between the official story they tell us and the ground truth of how the mechanics actually work. In every single sector, the sources argue that the legacy institutions we implicitly trust, the central banks, the parliament, the medical associations, are deeply compromised.
They are compromised by pure profit motives, by rigid ideology, or by hidden, unaccountable power structures.
It really makes you wonder, if the map they are giving us doesn't match the actual territory we are walking on, how do we navigate our lives?
That is the ultimate challenge for the listener today. The deep dive suggests the only real answer lies in looking incredibly closely at the fine print of life. Whether it's a boring new tax proposal, a massive UN treaty, or just the ingredients on a toothpaste tube.
It's about not blindly accepting the marketing pitch anymore. You know, they say, it's for startups. No, it's actually for hiding debt. They say, it's for inclusivity. No, it's actively ignoring basic safety. They say, it's for oral hygiene. Oh, no, it's actually raising your blood pressure.
It fundamentally challenges us to always follow the money, to question the comforting safety narratives we are fed, and to intentionally listen to the voices that society is actively trying to cancel. Because historically, usually, the people being silenced the loudest are the exact ones pointing directly at the hidden cracks in the facade.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. If the official institutions are all operating on these rigged, hidden systems, where does the individual actually find truth? Is it entirely possible that the crazy conspiracy theorists of 10 years ago were really just early adopters of reality?
That is definitely a thought that will keep you up at night staring at the ceiling.
We highly encourage you to go check the original sources yourself. Go find that 2017 EU press release online. Look up the specifics of the Box 3 tax rules. Don't just take our word for it. Dig
Yeah.
into the mechanics yourself.
Exactly. Stay curious.
And stay critical. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.